And we are live in Houston, Texas, hours away from crowning a national champion. You got Michigan, you got Washington, you got the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Staples, right here, ready to break it all down, man. Andy, you've been to a lot of these national title games, man. How does this one compare when it comes to the anticipation?
This one's great because I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. You know, last year, everybody knew it was going to happen. It was pretty obvious. And we've had a few of those like that, but this is one where it is two teams that have not seen an offense like they're going to see, and fresh blood in the title game. You know, neither of these teams has made the national title game in the BCS or the college football playoff era. And I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
That this is new access to new teams. And obviously it goes to 12 teams next year. But I think it probably gives a lot of other programs hope that, hey, if we do things right, if we recruit correctly, transfers in high school recruiting, that we can be there too.
Yeah, they kind of laid the blueprint. So it feels a lot like Washington is set to, if they win tonight, kind of break through that glass ceiling that we've been told is there of, well, you got to recruit in the top three. You got to have the right amount of, guys on your staff that have been there.
Even Michigan's in that boat
in
terms of recruiting, because they're not a program that stacks top 5 classes. Now they'll recruit in the top 10 sometimes, and they're almost always in the top 15, but they haven't recruited the way Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State have. And, you're supposed to have to do that.
Yeah.
But maybe you don't have to do that anymore. Maybe it's different. Maybe if you can strategically recruit the transfer portal, all of a sudden you have a much different looking roster.
It gives me kind of the Roger Bannister feel of, if you're not supposed to break the 4-minute mile barrier. If you do it, your heart will stop. You're not supposed to be a team that recruits outside the top 10. Michigan has recruited on average the last 4 years, right around 13. Washington, Andy, 36 is their average recruiting class ranking the last 4 years. So once somebody breaks that 4-minute mile barrier, we might see the floodgates kind of open for the 12-team playoff.
Well, the other thing for Washington, if we're going recruiting stars, Michael Penix Jr. was a 3-star guy.
Yeah.
He was the second quarterback in the class at Tennessee for most of his recruitment behind Adrian Martinez. It wasn't like people thought he was going to be a superstar in college football. And we had evidence, 3 years of evidence watching him play in Indiana. We're like, okay, there's some flashes of brilliance here, but I don't think this is ever going to come together.
So healthy.
Yeah. And sometimes people just need to get healthy, get in the right environment, get with the right coaching staff, and get older.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece is both these teams are very old, very experienced, and the COVID year has something to do with that. But even when the COVID guys phase out, which is coming up in the next couple of years, I do think that the ability to get old, stay old, like we talk about with the basketball tournament, I think that's going to be important too, because you've seen it's interesting with the teams that recruit at the really highest level, your Georgias, your Alabamas, your Ohio States, those players still go to the NFL at the same time. They still go after 3 years or after 4 years. You don't get a lot of 5th-year guys. It's just not what they do. But with the transfer portal now, you have the option to get these 5th-year guys, and then maybe you get them in their 4th year, or maybe you get them in their 3rd year. And all of a sudden, you've got some time with them. They can become part of your program. They can understand your system. They can help other people in it. It's a different world now.
Both teams come into this game with a very mature aura about themselves.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of felt that at national title media days. Like Michigan, to me, Andy, they felt loose. They felt confident. They had been in, I don't know how many different media days that were similar to that before, from the playoff from previous years.
Yeah.
Like the Ohio State game in itself has playoff stakes, and it feels as big a stage as before. Washington, though, to me, maybe not quite as loose, but very much so still confident, locked in. You saw a lot of the shades and the hoods on. Like those dudes were in Eminem mode. They were ready. They were ready to get after anything that you took away from just like, so we've talked the strategy.
Well, everybody's wearing the shades now.
Everyone's rocking. Shout out Coach Prime.
Exactly. And then, maybe it's the Pit Vipers, maybe it's the Oakleys, maybe it's Coach Prime's Blenders.
Yeah.
But
Ray-Bans.
It used to be you got in trouble for wearing shades indoors. So I don't know. I think we were in a new world now. But yes, everybody seems confident. It seems like with the Washington guys, there's very much a feeling of we've been through everything. So what can you possibly throw at us that we can't handle?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, for the older Washington guys, the oldest ones played for Chris Peterson. So the program went a completely different direction than they thought it was going to go. And so they had to deal with all that. The next group are the ones that came in during the Jimmy Lake era.
Mm-hmm.
They know what it's like to stink.
Yeah.
They know what it's like to have a terrible season and feel like, oh, we're more talented than we're showing on the field. And then you got the younger guys who, honestly, not a lot of them playing right now.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the guys starting for Washington went through 4-8 with Jimmy Lake and never want to feel that way again. Really appreciate where they are right now. And I do think that gives you a certain level of confidence. Like, hey, we've been bad. We've been down. Like, we're not going to be scared of these guys with the winged helmets.
They're all battle tested. Like you just said, they've seen every kind of visual, felt every kind of emotion you can feel in college football, except for a spot like this national title game. And the same is true for Michigan. And we've gotten to this point in the week, and it's the only show in town. We had a full week to unpack strategy and scheme and storylines. So with that being said, what would be a result or an occurrence tonight that would surprise you the most?
Washington just hammers Michigan.
Yes.
That's the one that would
Glad you
surprise
said
me
that.
the most. And what that would mean is Washington probably jumps all over Michigan. Michigan is stressing to try to catch up. They make some bad throws. They get some interceptions. And that's how it goes down. I will give you an example of a game like that where the result maybe didn't match the matchup. Remember when Alabama played Clemson the third time in the national title game, and Clemson just destroyed Alabama. That was one where they kept trying to catch up, kept trying to chase, and it rolled downhill on them. Like, remember they had the fake, or they had the fake punt or fake field goal, and I got so. That's a situation where a game can get out of hand on you, and it could do that either way for these teams. But that would be the way that happens for Washington, and that would absolutely be the most surprising result. Like, if Michigan were to dominate Washington, I wouldn't be as surprised. I think it probably isn't going to happen. I think we're going to get a close game, but that one would make sense just stylistically, because you think, okay, if this is happening and Michigan's averaging like 5.5, 6 yards a carry, they're just grinding through. Their drives are taking so long that when Penix gets back on the field, they're out of rhythm. Like, that makes sense.
I think the path to victory, I think most of us agree, it's more narrow for Washington. Like, the Washington script reads, Rome Odunze goes off. Michael Penix Jr. is dropping it in the breadbasket. They're scoring north of 40, and that's kind of the way they find their path. But the footing for Michigan is fairly straightforward, and they're going to be good on defense. They're going to be good on offense. The scenario that surprised me the most, Andy, kind of in that same vein, if we see Michigan look how they did in that playoff game last year against TCU, it didn't feel like a Michigan kind of team.
No.
Like bad mistakes.
It was sloppy.
They got down within the red zone, and they're throwing screens to the outside.
Yeah.
Like, they doubled down on who they were in such key spots this year, the Penn State game, the Ohio State game. If we don't see them look that way in this game, what do all these guys come back for?
If it's the Penn State game, Michigan's going to lose.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, in terms of running the football for the entirety of the half, like, we know who we are. We're doing this.
That's not why they did that, though. They did that because they couldn't protect.
Okay.
And Penn State's offense was so bad that they didn't need to worry about it. So the offense they're playing now is really good. So they can't do that. They can't just, because remember, that game, I want to say they averaged like 3.9 yards a carry in the second half, or during that stretch where they were just running 20 plays in a row. Like, that was not ideal. It was because they were scared, because Chop Robinson was dominating on the edge. And they felt like, oh, we got a problem. And I think J.J. McCarthy might have been a little bit dinged up too. So they can't do that if that happens in this game. They will have to try to throw the ball. The thing is, I think they can. I think, as bad as the Zach Zinter injury was, it forced Carson Barnhart inside. He's not dealing with the edge anymore. That's probably better for him. Trente Jones has been better out there on the edge. And they got edge guys at Washington, Braylon Trice.
Yeah, they do.
That can make you pretty miserable. But they've got Ladarius Henderson in this game. They should be okay on that front. And I think J.J. McCarthy is a pretty important piece of this, because we've not seen him just take over a game.
Yeah.
I do think he has that in him.
Yeah.
I think he's dynamic enough to do that. I think we saw it in the last drive of regulation against Alabama, where J.J. McCarthy said, okay, I am taking this team down the field. We are scoring. And they only use that when they need it. But if Washington jumps on them, if Washington scores a couple early touchdowns and it's like 14-0, It's JJ time. That's how you get back.
Yeah, and I think we've seen flashes of that too, like Ohio State game a season ago where he went off, and obviously Donovan Edwards popping a couple big runs doesn't hurt things either.
Yeah.
But I think the thing going back to the Penn State game for me was when they can't do what they want to do, they are willing to go to the ground and pound, try and control the game, try and be that. They still have that identity of source. Now, if you do that against Washington, to your point, you're not hanging around.
The problem is if you do that against Washington and just punt it back to them, they're going to score
a long game.
Yeah. So that's the thing. Now, I do think they should be more successful in the pass game against Washington than they were against Penn State and then they were against Alabama. This is a different level of secondary than they played against Alabama. So the question is, which of those guys, which pass catcher is the one who is the beneficiary of all this? Is it Roman Wilson? Do they go to the tight end with Colson Loveland? Is it one of the younger guys? I don't know. I think the problem with Michigan is like, their receivers aren't exactly household names.
Yeah.
Because they haven't needed to use them that much. And the question is, can they get open in a key spot? Now, they did throw the ball for a touchdown in the Rose Bowl when they absolutely needed it. But that was Roman Wilson. That was a kind of scheming them open.
Yeah.
That was Jim Harbaugh and J.J. McCarthy talking about their favorite play after the game. So, but the reason he was open is because they had run enough to make Alabama think, oh, they're handing off Blake Corum here.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah.
Without kind of sucked them into that degree. Something that I don't know has been talked about quite enough throughout the course of this week. I forget if it was halftime or if it was post game, but Nick Saban told the sideline reporter at ESPN, like a big part of our game plan, we want to attack their secondary. And that's with a group like Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, Jalen Milroe, who's not a slouch of an operation, but compared to Roma Dunze, Michael Penix Jr.
This is a very different one. Yeah.
I mean, if Saban's seeing something, there's got to be a little bit more to that, no?
Oh, agreed.
Is there something there that you're looking at like, hey, if Penix can maybe have 2 Mississippis, there might be something to be had. That's how they want to live either way.
I think he's going to have enough time.
Yeah.
He's gotten rid of the ball on time every game this year. Now, there have been games when he hasn't been as effective and he's been off, but he's been getting rid of the ball. So, do they attack Josh Wallace? I don't think Will Johnson's a person you want to really attack.
I want to be me.
So, but the question is, so one person's on Roma Dunze. That means somebody's got to get Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk. And here's the other thing. Like, these Michigan guys will know, Giles Johnson's still there.
Yeah.
Like, Giles Johnson was a rotation receiver for Michigan back in the day.
Yeah.
Like, and he'll catch a ball in a big game. Like, the first Oregon game, he was catching balls in big spots.
And he has that famous viral clip where he let the Michigan faithful know how he felt after he had transferred from Michigan to Washington and they had played at Michigan. Anyway, some language that is NSFW.
Yes,
even with that
correct.
Even with that being said, there's you would imagine a little bit of chippiness between that matchup if there ends up being a fair amount of that we see on the field.
Absolutely. And it's weird because there are not a lot of connections in this game. Giles Johnson's the most obvious connection. Ladarius Henderson at Michigan played at Arizona State, so he actually played on the last team to beat Washington. That's about it. There's not a lot of crossover. Roger Rosengarten and Drake Nugent, the left tackle or right tackle for Colorado for Washington and the center for Michigan are both from Colorado, like have known each other for years. But that's pretty much it. Like, these guys don't know each other, didn't run in the same circles. Like, this is not like when most of those the last few national title games, all these guys were in the same camps together.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again during their recruitments. This is a little bit different.
Yeah, no overlap. Nobody's still on the roster from the 93 Rose Bowl when these teams last played each other. We haven't had that. We haven't had the COVID year plus everybody's complaining about extended eligibility. Not quite the 20.
No, they did play they played in the Jimmy Lake year, so at least they a lot of I guess a lot of these guys have seen each other in one game.
Sure,
that game, as the Washington players will tell you, was not representative of what this team is.
Without question. Now, in games like this, Andy, it feels like it always comes down to an X factor of sorts, maybe a player that was, a little bit lower on the depth chart, or maybe we haven't heard as much, from this season. Is there someone that you're watching from either side here that could stick out as a potential X factor when this whole thing settles?
What about Cornelius Johnson, the star of the Michigan-Ohio State game in 2022? The guy who kind of he and JJ kept them in it before they get their running game going and really take over in the second half. That's one, because we've seen his capability to break a big play, to get open down the field and allow them to stretch the defense vertically. And if Michigan can even do that once or twice, it changes everything for the run game too.
Without question.
Because if you're going against a lighter box with what they can do, it's scary.
You can't sacrifice resources against Michigan and feel good about your chances. How about Jack Westover for Washington?
Yeah.
We talk so much about all these wide receivers for the Huskies and how much they push deep, but it feels like if they're able to, similar to what you just said, if they can get some success early, land some haymakers, and force that secondary into a little bit more of like retreat mode and, we don't want to get burned for another time. At that point, I have a hard time believing there's not a whole lot of real estate for Jack Westover. He's one of the reasons why I like his more total in receptions and prize picks, 2.5. So I'm taking the more total there for the folks watching at home.
How about the JJ 200.5 in prize picks?
I don't know how I feel about that.
That one feels a little tempting right there. Because if Washington sucks them into a game where they're going to have to score a bunch of points, he's going more than that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. My concern is what happens if Michigan just says, okay, plan A is still plan A.
Right.
We have success running the football. But I guess even in that situation, you could play action your way to 200.
Up to 203.5 this morning.
Okay.
So somebody's thinking that Michigan's going to gain a few more yards.
Move in a certain direction.
3 yards different.
Move in a certain direction. With that being said, any other like totals or players you like there when it comes to the prize picks or the props world? Anybody that you're watching?
Well, I'm looking at on prize picks the Michael Penix 2.5 pass rush receiving TDs. I feel like that feels like a pretty easy more. And one reason I'll tell you why is you saw Michael Penix running the ball a little bit more against Texas. They were struggling a little bit to get their backs going against Texas, which is hard to do with those linemen. But Michael Penix was keeping on read options, and Michael Penix is really fast.
Yes.
They've not had to use him in that way. They will use him in that way tonight because they have to pull out of the stops. They have to win this game. So if they're struggling, Dylan Johnson is not 100%, which he said he's not going to be. Michael Penix is going to have to help carry the rushing load. So the idea of Michael Penix throwing a rushing touchdown in there feels like
sprinkle it on there a little bit. I like that a lot.
So,
I like that a lot. Yeah, I think it is funny because it's kind of been this evolution of Michael Penix Jr. Like when he was at Indiana, I'm thinking like, oh, he's gonna hurt you with his legs. Like that was his asset.
The pieces of the dual threat kind of reverse themselves.
Yeah,
but he always had that arm. Like I go back to that. Remember the Penn State game in 2020 when he reaches out for the pylon in overtime. And if you go back and look, he was not nearly as accurate back then as he is now, and he's just spraying it all over the field for 3/4 of the game. And then right in crunch time, he starts throwing darts. And it's like, where does this come from? What is this? And that's what he evolved to be.
Without question.
I mean, that guy for 4 quarters every game.
I mean, some of the throws he made against Texas, and granted, Texas isn't going to be the same secondary as Michigan, but like the way they push the ball deep and the window of margin he has on some of those throws, like it is, I mean, the receivers all the way out near the tick marks. Like you have 6 inches, a foot of leeway in terms of where you can put that football. And he's just every time, man, just absolutely dialed in. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I mean, I think it speaks a little bit to why Washington's in this game, because they've used the portal well. I mean, so has Michigan with how they've used the portal. I mean, what does that say about where these teams are in the complexion of how they've evolved in modern college football?
It's amazing how they've used the portal, because both of these teams, I think we can agree, are mostly homegrown rosters. You know, all of Washington's offensive line, I believe all of their defensive line, 2 of the 3 top receivers. Now the quarterbacks are transfer, so that's a big deal. But the star running back is a transfer, but because the guy who was supposed to be the star running back got hurt in preseason camp.
Yeah.
Michigan, quarterback's homegrown. 3/5 of the offensive line. A lot of the defensive line. But look at the key spots where they've been able to put people in. You know, left tackle, center. There's Josiah Stewart on the edge from Coastal Carolina. Made one of the biggest plays in the Rose Bowl. And they've done a great job. I mean, you go back to last year, Oluwatimi at center from Virginia. It was the one hole they needed to fill, and they filled it. And I think that's what has changed the complexion of how you build a national championship team, how you build a team that can go deep in the playoff. And it'll be different next year too, because it'll be a multi-round playoff situation. You'll have teams that have to win 4 games to win, or teams that have to win 3 games to win. And does that then tilt it back to the people who stack the 5 stars? I don't know that it does. I still think the 8, like what we saw with Alabama this year, where in the Rose Bowl, they had a center who could not snap.
Yeah.
They knew that. That had happened before this season. They didn't have anyone to replace him. They didn't have anybody they felt were comfortable, could get the snap back there and then block effectively. Alabama.
Alabama,
so that tells you, and Georgia, to a lesser extent, in the SEC title game, being thin at receiver or playing banged up receivers. Like, they were different. So those teams just don't have the depth anymore that they used to. And I don't think that helps them necessarily. I think they're probably in the same boat in the playoff. And so these teams that are old, that have a bunch of guys that have been in the system, that have plugged in a couple key transfers, I think they're probably the ones that have the best shot now.
I mean, we got asked a question on our show, I guess it was a week or 2 ago. It was, hey, are we done seeing the college football legends, the Tavon Austins, the Robert Griffin III? Are we done seeing those guys at schools like a Baylor, like West Virginia, like not a blue blood per se?
Right.
And Trey Yannity, who's actually producing the show, came out swinging when I asked him that question. He's like, I think actually the opposite. I think we're going to see more guys out of Georgia, out of Ohio State, that are 5-star guys get to that spot, see other 5-star guys. I'm like, well, I got to transfer somewhere else. And Washington might be a spot that's going to reap the benefits of that in the future.
Right. I think the problem is, like, for the West Virginias of the world and the Purdues and the schools like that, they'll lose their best players to the blue bloods, but they're probably not the destination that the 5-stars from Georgia and the ones who are just sort of on the cusp but don't want to wait to play, they're probably not the destination. The destination is probably Ole Miss or Tennessee or
Oregon,
or Oregon, might be Penn State, might be Wisconsin, might be, teams that are kind of right there on the edge. And Wisconsin's not right there on the edge now, but I firmly believe Luke Fickell will get them to the point where we're talking about them as a 12-team playoff contender. And so that's the tricky part. Like, for certain schools, it probably gets much worse, but for a lot of schools, now you have a real chance. And I have a column that's coming out on 3 where we talk about who can win the national title next year. Like, who should realistically go through this season? I listed 16 teams, JD.
Oh, no kidding.
Like,
16.
that should feel somewhat confident, at least, if not very confident.
Any spoilers you want to give the people? They got to go check it out.
You feel free to read, but you've got your usual suspects. But
right.
I'll throw one out there. Louisville.
Hey, okay.
Louisville, which has done great in the transfer portal. Tyler Shook is kind of the Michael Penix thought. That's what every coach is thinking with Tyler Shook, because Tyler Shook has all the talent in the world. He's never been healthy for a season. He's been at Oregon and he's been at Texas Tech, and he's just been banged up. If he could ever stay healthy, which is exactly what they said about Michael Penix. And now he's with a guy in Jeff Brom who is great with quarterbacks. And they have done a great job in the transfer portal. They have done a good job recruiting out of high school too. So could they win the ACC? Well, they were in the ACC championship game this year. So yes, they could win the ACC. And the ACC champ is going to get a bye.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so the commissioners are going to meet, I believe it's today. I mean, they're meeting now. And they're supposed to kind of rubber stamp this thing where they change the format, where instead of 6 automatic bids for conference champions, it's going to go to 5 because there's no more Pac-12. And that means probably the champions of the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, and Big 12 are getting buys.
Yeah.
Because you have to be a conference champion to get a bye. And so if you're Arizona, if you're Utah, if you're Kansas State, you should be very excited about that. If you are Louisville, Florida State, Clemson, that should be pretty exciting, because that one fewer game is a big deal, especially if you get a good draw. Think about this. Let's say Arizona wins the Big 12. They'll be the 4 seed probably.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5 seed is going to have to play. The 5 seed should be the best non-champion from the SEC, the Big Ten. But what if Notre Dame goes 11-1, 12-0? If Notre Dame's 12-0 and their schedule's pretty easy next year, they're the 5. So they're going to play the 12.
Yep.
Which will be your American champ or your Mountain West champ. So let's say Notre Dame wins that game and then plays Louisville in a quarter. Louisville's into the semis possibly if they beat Notre Dame again.
It gets interesting.
They beat them this year. And so that doesn't mean you're going to play for national championship. You're going to have some superpower on the other end that you're probably going to wind up with.
Right.
But there's a path for some of these teams. Obviously, the path is probably cleaner for Georgia.
Sure.
For Ohio State, for Michigan.
Yep.
Now Michigan's going to have to rebuild the roster.
Yeah.
They got a ton of NFL guys.
Yeah.
So, Washington too. So the question is, who's that next one up? Who's the one that's got the young guys? Like, does Penn State have some young guys that if they develop, now they're in that position in the Big Ten? We'll see.
And who knows who's playing quarterback for Michigan this time next year? I mean, could this be J.J. McCarthy's
that's a great
last
question.
game? And I mean, kind of taking it back to this national title game. Like I said, we've talked it to the absolute ends of the earth, but then we get to Houston and we get a chance to kind of be around these teams and sort of get a gauge for, as best we can tell, the buzz and the psyche and all those things that you just can't quantify. With your pick of the Wolverines, how do you feel from making that pick a week ago or a little less than a week ago to now being on the day of the game?
I've gone back and forth, because when this matchup was set, I thought I'm definitely picking Washington. If I'm getting points, I'm picking Washington. Okay. And the more I thought about it, the more it's like we talked about at the beginning of the show, like the scenarios of how do you envision this game playing out? Like dominant Washington win, dominant Michigan win, close Washington win, close Michigan win. Like, who has more potential wins in the toolbox?
Totally.
And it feels like Michigan does. So that's why I went with them. And I still feel that way. But I will tell you, the closer you get to game time and you think about Michael Penix, and you think about those receivers, you're like, oh my God, what if they just go off? What if they just go off and he throws for 450 yards?
It's one of those scenarios, 100%. I mean, so that actually makes me feel better that you said that, because I was on the other side of that, picked Washington, kind of felt similar to you. Okay, it opens up. I picked against Washington too many times. I was like, forget it. My gut's been wrong so many times on
That's why I picked him against Texas.
I'm going to roll with them. And then we got here to Houston. We got around J.J. McCarthy, got around these teams, and I was like, dude, I don't know. That's a confident bunch.
J.J.
They
McCarthy
seem loose, man. They look like they feel good about this.
So this is your first time being around J.J. McCarthy, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
But just being
He's
like
swaggy as hell.
Swaggy as it gets, like confident. And I mean, you see that on TV, and we'd been around him a little bit in person from last year's Ohio State game, but like in a spot like this, like the stage, obviously, 2X, whatever they had been in this different spot. So, I mean, being around him, being around that team, and then seeing Washington and seeing them locked in, like there's probably a fine line between locked in and high strung.
Right.
And I think Washington's on the locked in side of that.
I think you're right. And Michigan is the one I worry about more getting high strung mostly because of the way Jim Harbaugh coaches. That he is, they feel very result oriented more than process oriented. I wrote about this a little bit with Michigan and Alabama last week. And those teams in these situations, it probably was part of their problem in the playoff against TCU last year, but it feels like the players are not like that. They're not in the all or nothing. Because if you get even though this game actually is all or nothing, if you look at it that way, you can get in bad shape if a couple plays don't go your way early. Like, you have to be able to just flush what happened and play the next play. And I do feel like the Michigan players are good at that.
I think that's a great point, because this was kind of an all or nothing season, like a result oriented season. I mean, that's why a guy like Blake Corum comes back. I know the NFL part is obviously baked into that with what happened with his knee and things like that. But I mean, that was kind of the headline was we're coming back, unfinished business. We're here to win it. And so it's kind of that tug and pull of, well, you have this ultimate goal, but you still have to be process oriented to achieve that ultimate goal.
And the other thing is Michigan hadn't been down until the Rose Bowl. Yeah. We hadn't seen how they would react to being down in the fourth quarter. And they handled it very, very well. I mean, they had a 4th and 2 from their own 33. That was the game. They made it look easy converting it. And then they roared down the field, scored a touchdown, and dominated overtime.
with all the pressure in the world on them.
Yes.
Like you talk about pressure, like Washington, I know it's the national title game, but like in some way, shape, or form, on the outside looking in, like they're playing with house money, right? Like I don't think most people had Washington in this game back to a season ago when you made your preseason picks. You know, like Washington is very much so here to win the game, but like all the pressure is on Michigan in that sense. So I'm interested to see how Michigan handles that in the early going, because we saw that first play of the game in the Rose Bowl where you were there. Caleb Downs snags that one, and you're like, oh boy,
it's over.
Here we go.
And then they reverse it. And they punt, and you're like, oh, it might still be over. And because but they handled the punches very well, because there were some swings in that game that they dealt with, and again, they were the dominant team at the end, and so they're going to get punched by Washington at some point, and I imagine it's going to be early, because that's when you haven't seen anything like this, like you're probably going to give up a player or two pretty early.
No, without question. I mean, and when it comes back to everything going on within the special teams last week, would love to get your thoughts on this, because I'm sitting here saying, okay, that was a week ago.
Oh, yeah.
And obviously they're drilling down on that. That's a big factor. I'm sure that was a major emphasis during all the special teams periods for Michigan. But when you go to like the overall feeling in practice and overall feeling, like that's not a long time to correct those mistakes. And I know they're all fixable. Like, you know, you can drill catching punts, you can drill the field goal operation, you can drill the operation within the special teams extra point. But like, Andy, am I crazy in thinking there could still be some of that lingering from the Rose Bowl into this game?
I think the punt return is the issue, like catching punts. Now, I will tell you, the Rose Bowl, unique place, unique setting, time. We always talk about the sunset. Well, to get that sunset, you have some weird shadow situations on the field. And so this is a tough place to field punts. And I think that first muff punt probably causes what happened at the end of the game. Now, it was dark at that point. You're just dealing with the lights, but that gets in your head. Everybody's a little bit tense. They've got to clean that up. I suspect they will. I suspect that's not going to be an issue going forward. That's not the sort of thing they've done all year. And I think it's one of those things that, like, you have it happen to you, and then everybody's just kind of tense at that point. But you catch that first one in this game, I don't think you see that problem again. And then the operation on the extra point wasn't something they'd had a problem with all year. Wasn't something they had a problem with the rest of the game.
Right. Yeah. And it was something that sort of indoors, you would imagine, is less of a factor.
Right.
But
yeah, very controlled environment at NRG Stadium.
Yeah, very much so controlled. I don't think there'll be don't think that roof will be open today. It's a little bit rainy here in Houston. I think that'll be an even playing field when it comes to that. Andy, we're about 8 hours and some change away from Toe Meat and Leather here in NRG Stadium. Your final take, thought, thing you're watching when it comes to this game tonight for all the marbles.
JJ.
Yep.
Is this going to be a big JJ game? Is it going to have to be a big JJ game? I think it may. I think Michael Penix Jr. and those receivers are gonna eat a little bit. And the only way Michigan handles that is they get something from JJ in the pass game. It's not just going to be them grinding it out on the ground.
As cliche as it is, my final thought is, who plays the cleanest?
Yeah.
Texas had all the tools to beat Washington. They just turned the ball over twice and had 60 yards with 10 penalties that they surrendered to the Huskies. So I think whoever plays the cleanest style of game will be best set up to win the football game. And that's a pretty no-dust statement. It's how football works. But I think it's imperative for Michigan. You can't be living in 3rd and 9. You can't be living in 3rd and 11. I don't think they expect to do that. But going back to your point, if they are in that spot, the impact for a J.J. McCarthy goes through the roof with what he needs to do.
It is going to be so much fun. We're almost there, JD. Can't wait.
About to happen, y'all. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll have content for you as soon as we hit 000 in NRG Stadium. We will see y'all after the game.